Hello and welcome to Stampscaping 101. I haven't done a video for a while, but I wanted to get a little bit of video time in to cover something that I've been wanting to cover just in its own video for a while now. I've had a lot of questions about ink application, and even though I do this technique in just about, I don't know, probably 90% of the videos out there, I wanted to just cover a single element of the technique here in this video. Now, I've talked about different stamp pads in the past, and the different inks and the different kind of viscosity of them, how thin, relatively thin and thick they are. If you want to watch those, I'll put the number of the video down in the description area of this video, but one of the things that I've covered is the use of the thicker inks as your base layer of ink, okay? And typically we're working from a light color into the darker colors. Personally, I like the Adirondack Lights by Ranger for this purpose. They're very light and they're very thick. Now, the Adirondack line has been discontinued, but there's still a lot of inks out there, especially the re-inkers, okay? They probably have a back stock of it, at least at this time of this video, so I don't know, by the time you're watching this, maybe they're out and you can use some kind of substitute. But, okay, this is used to even, my pads are so old, it doesn't even have the new naming convention or cases. They used to be called seashells, and they changed it to Adirondack Lights. Okay, now this pad should be fairly well inked, okay? And I'm using the Color Box Stylus tool and inking it up and dragging this ink in. Now, this isn't going to be scene-based, it's just a video that's going to be technique-based, okay? I'm getting a lot of ink down. This is a glossy cardstock, and I can really drag this around, and usually if you look at any of the videos, there's a lot of coverage with these lighter valued inks. They're kind of my base coat. It really, in theory, doesn't even have to be a color, but if I'm going with water or a blue sky or something like that, that's, a good starting point. It's in the hue of the color scheme of that area of the card. And it's just the lightest value of that color scheme. Alright? Now, this pad is really super juicy. I tend to use a lot of inks with my first colors because not only does it get me good coverage, but it also acts as kind of a coating that's also penetrating the surface of this card a little bit and getting the pulp of the card moist, okay? Now, a lot of times, my medium to darker tones really aren't going to be that juicy, and this is probably juicier as a pad than even a brand new pad, just because I set it that way. But this is my point here of this video. If you have re-inkers of certain colors of inks that you're using, especially if it's kind of a thicker ink, what I like to do, it's just a faster and more effective, potentially a more effective way of doing this is just to use your re-inker fluid, okay? With my lighter colors of ink, sometimes I figure, I have these pads here, but what I started doing in my workshops and things like that, I just started taking around some re-inker fluid, inking up my sponging, tool, and that's a lot of ink on there, okay? You can see it's puddled up, but I don't have to, well, I probably won't have to. I don't think I'm going to have to re-ink at all. I just spread, basically, this ink out. Now, I didn't use these, your typical re-inker bottles, they hold a lot of ink, okay? And I don't know how many re-inkings they're good for, but it's probably dozens and dozens, okay? And you don't have to worry about the the quantity on here, okay? In other words, but just getting that kind of that slathering of ink down, for lack of a better word, it's very quick and efficient, in terms of time and effectiveness. But you can see here I got quite a bit of ink down just using that ink pad, okay? But look how much darker this one. Now this is the exact same type of ink and same paper that I'm using here. This one looks darker, doesn't it? Okay, let's see. Back up a little bit. Now remember, these inks are really, really, really light in value. So that's about as dark as it's going to get. Now I thought I had a really good coating of it with the ink pad right here. But you can see how much more ink, you can lay down just by using the re-inker fluid in whatever sponging method you want, Okay, now let's do this something again. Okay, now let's take one of these cosmetic sponges right here. This is like an ancient bag of it right here. It's probably undergone a couple different packaging, updates since then. I have no idea. I bought those, it's probably been 15 years, I'm guessing. Let's get some of this inker fluid down here just to show you that, using kind of this re-inker methodology, you can use other types of applicators, okay? Now these sponges are really inexpensive as far as I know. And like I said, I haven't bought them in a long time, but this used to be pretty much the, the sponge applicator that a lot of people used back before a lot of different accessories came out. Okay, now you see how that ink laid down there? Okay, maybe I can add a little bit more in this one. Okay, now you can dab, you can streak, whatever. And if you have a lot of ink, it really spreads out nice and smoothly, and in quantity, which is exactly what you want when doing this technique right here, especially in that first color of ink. All right, now let's move up into some darker tones. Let's go with a Memento, which is a fairly thick ink in itself, okay? And let's lay this down here. Now, if this is like the first video that you've seen on the Stampscape YouTube channel, you probably wonder what the heck this technique is for, but this is, generally the technique that's being used to apply a lot of layers of ink to create a rich, kind of varied background in the different scenes that we're doing. If I leave some areas of the cards kind of white, a lot of times it can reflect, or it can represent lighting within a given area, typically water. It could be a cloud in the sky. Okay, but now see, this Memento is being laid down, and even, this is a sharp-edged tool, so if I am getting some of that, the fact that I laid down that foundation of thick base layer color or value, it really allows me to blend, any of these choppy marks right out of there, because the paper is fairly moist still, because I have penetrated the surface of the card with some moisture from that especially from that first color of ink, okay? So, when when those seashells colors came out, which later became Adirondack Lights, it was a thick, light-colored ink. Now, I'm saying all this, unfortunately, they've been discontinued by Ranger, but I had been using Marvy inks, which were thinner inks, very dense with color, though, but thinner in terms of consistency, so they didn't give you as much time to spread it out. So when these came out, they became my, best friend, in terms of teaching this technique in workshops, because people can lay down as much as they wanted to, and it always spread out for them. And it was so light in value that the worst technique in the world, these people are using, doing the technique for the first time, but you couldn't make a mistake with it, okay? So that's why I started using it. And I use it personally, too, not just for workshops. I mean, I've done this technique many, many times, but it just provides such a beautiful service. So I use those pads, and then we were using, I don't know, it took me a while. I'm a slow learner, but I figured we're laying down so much color in that first, swatch of whatever color we're working with. In this case, it happens to be blue, like right on here. I used up a lot of it. Generally, when I move into the darker tones, I'm not using as much color or as much ink, so that first color, instead of taking, I don't know, 5 minutes to lay down that first base layer, just going with the reinker fluid on a tip made things go by so much faster. So you're really saving a lot of time, and you can't help but get the correct amount of ink down on your paper. A lot of times people don't put down enough of that first base coat, and sometimes later on they start struggling with the darker tones, when you get around to this, really dark blue like that. That's going to be stuck there, but if you've laid down enough of that base coat, right, it's moist underneath there, so you can still kind of spread that out. And it won't set up for you hard and fast. Now, I purposely did, a hard thing. I mean, you're not going to do that, in your technique there. Now, sometimes I might squeeze a little bit of ink like that, but I'm trying not to press super hard. I'm just kind of squeezing it out of the sponge tip here. Okay. That's kind of a dark blue. It's another Memento color. Now let's move over to the Marvy kind of thinner color. I'm happy to report that I guess you can get blank Marvy cases now. These also happen to be discontinued, but the re-inker fluid for them is still available. And you can buy blank Marvy pads, which have a different foam that's used for those thinner types of inks. I don't know, you might be able to use a blank Ranger pad for the Marvy. I'm not quite sure. But that foam is different, as a fabric or whatnot, or as an ink, retainer, than some of the other brands of inks. So I would probably, if you're going to use a Marvy re-inker fluid ink to create your own Marvy pad, I would go with the Marvy pads. They've been designed for them, to hold the ink and to provide an effective whatever vessel for that material. Okay, so laying this in, we have a good swatch laid down, and that color, the base layer colors on underneath these darker tones, are providing a nice foundation, and it's making the end result much richer as a result of the colors being transparent, which dye-based inks are. That being said, let me get here. Okay, here's another piece of, I've shown this on other videos too, but let's do it again here. Let me just switch out one of these tips right here, and let me go with that. Oops, flip that over. But let me just go with a couple of these really dark colors that don't have the lighter and medium tones underneath it, okay? This is the Danube Blue, okay? And let's just lay down a bunch of it here, okay? I'm not doing this to create a whole swatch card. I just want you to see the difference that even when you lay down a lot of this darker tone over the tops of the lighter tones, do you see the difference between these two? I mean, this color is okay, but it looks kind of flat, right? And kind of lifeless. This right here is creating much more of a, I don't know, color glow, you might say. Not really a glow, but I don't know, it's just so much more rich and deep of a surface there. I mean, it doesn't even look like that, right? You know, from this to this. No, here, I've used some of that Marvy blue in here too. Let's go in with that. Okay. Well, I mean, it looks a little bit better, but still. Okay, let's drag this out. Okay, here we go. This is the Marvy over the Danube Blue, and this is the, you know, the color with the Adirondack Lights, Ocean Aqua. What was that called? Bahama Blue, and Danube Blue, and just blue from Marvy. It's number 3 blue. Anyways, let's see how much better, in my opinion, this looks, you know, even, I mean, just this color right here, you know, from that one. It just looks more full and rich, you know, and deep. And usually in scenic stamping, we're kind of representing depth within a two-dimensional surface. And we do that with stamps. We have large objects in the foreground, smaller objects in the background, etc. But you can also create depth just with the use of your color in whatever given space you're working in. When you have that much color laid down, in my opinion, it's just made so much easier as far as the technique goes. If you lay down a lot of that re-inker fluid, and most pads out there have re-inker fluid, so even if the pad itself doesn't seem to work as good, sometimes pads, even brand new, they don't have a lot of ink in them because they don't want it to be too inky. You know, it's not because they're bad, but let's say I took a stamp like this, you know, these little ripples here, those little ripples there are made of like tiny little dots, right? So if they made a pad just really super juicy, and I inked it up in there, not necessarily Memento, but any kind of brand, and I made an impression with it, it would be all puddled up with ink in there. There would be too much ink, right? So they purposely don't want to make pads super juicy just for that purpose. It would be filling in the detail of a lot of different stamps out there. So that's where your re-inker fluids come in. Just take re-inker fluid, put it in, I don't know, you can even put it in, you know, a top like that. You don't have to have like a little palette like this. You can put it on anything. You can put it on some saran wrap or something like that. But let's just lay down a pretty good slathering of it on your paper, and typically it will move and glide much better than just having, you know, kind of a lesser quantity of ink on some, you know, whatever applicator you know, happen to be using. So anyways, if you want to make your life much easier in terms of your stamping techniques, if you're doing this particular layered dye-based ink on glossy cardstock technique, get yourself a good re-inker fluid. Okay, now you don't have to, if you have 25 different colors of ink pads, or some of you have probably 200 or whatever, you don't need too many, okay? You can even go with the primaries. For my blues, greens, purples, if I wanted to, I could use blue, because I could use blue for the blues. I could use blue for purple, because if I put light blue ink down and I run some pink over it, it'll look purple. If I run blue down and I put yellow over it, it'll look green. So if I have a grassy area or something like that, you know, I can also use the blue in that area. I don't have to have a super light green re-inker if I don't have it, okay? And if I have yellow, that would be good. That's kind of a primary color, blue plus yellow. You can use a re-inker for the blue and yellow if you want to. You can mix the two colors together, and that'll give you kind of a, you know, a green, some variation of green depending on how much blue and yellow you use and how much, I don't know, what value of those colors are to begin with. And then if you add kind of a pink, it's kind of the primary, it's the lighter version of red. So if you want to, you can have the three primaries as very light colors, and those are really good starting points for your foundational base coat colors for the layered dye-based ink technique. So anyways, that's my tip of the day, and hope that comes in handy for you. And oh, also, one of the things about the different glossy cardstocks out there is they're not all made the same. I have a different video on glossy cardstocks as well as using kind of a, you know, a inkjet photo paper that I went through as well. Watch that video if you want to know about papers. I won't get into it here, but you know what my point is if I use kind of a, you know, a really thick, juicy, inked up, you know, foam applicator of some sort like that, it's a little bit of an equalizer in terms of the different absorbency characteristics of whatever your paper you're using. So some papers, you know, your ink's dry on them a little bit faster. So if they do that, if you're using more ink to begin with, it gives you a little bit more freedom in terms of the technique that you're using to apply it. So in other words, if I have a paper that's drying real fast and I'm inking up, you know, the tips would be prone to tearing because, you know, the surface of the paper is so dry and it's grabbing and absorbing the ink out of the tips faster. So if you just have more ink to begin with, you know, such as the re-inker fluid, it just gives you so much more time to apply that ink before it gets absorbed into the papers. So it's good for that reason as well. Alright, so if you happen to be running into kind of issues in terms of your ink application, getting harsh, you know, edgy marks, you know, with your applicators, like that, you know, and they're not blending in, you know, to your card nice and smoothly, I would recommend trying a re-inker. It just makes things so much easier. Okay, anyways, hope that comes in handy for you, and thanks for watching the video.